Hallo Freunde, willkommen zurück zu .NET API Review. And yeah, German's a crutch, but I'm really sleepy today. We have, oh, 12's a milestone. Um, we have 2/3 of a screen of 11. I'm hoping we'll get through 4. Let's see if we get through 1. Oh, I didn't even open things today. And yeah, that's a good point, Kevin. There is a website with the agenda on it. Weird. All right. First up, a new low-level TLS machine. .NET Runtime 128871. Tomas.
Okie dokie. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Well, awesome. So the general motivation is performance here. So it's kind of late in the release, and so that's we're trying to pitch it as a experimental to decrease the risk. Basically, what happened is we work with Kestrel folks, and we build a prototype, test it with customer, and we can get a decent improvement. So this is really catered for special use cases. It's not API for, I think, general public. Obviously, we can't prevent people from using it directly, but it's geared towards people who do not need Stream API, or they, for IO, where a lot of the idiomatic way, it's like you create a stream, and in case of SSL stream, you need stream below as a feed, and then you need socket below, and so that comes with overhead, both in terms of memory and context switches on thread pools and stuff. So basically, this aims to basically provide access to low-level SSL stream guts that basically the plan. There's a proof of concept. We again benchmark and prototype that basically we use the existing code, except rather than forcing you to use stream instead of Kestrel, which is unfortunate, then basically it allows people to read and process TLS in chunks without specific IO model in mind. So this whole thing is meant to be primitive, simple, and non-blocking, and as efficient as humanly possible. So basically, there's only minimal layer of code which actually does something useful to basically bridge the crypto and the platform differences and whatnot. But long run, this should probably become the bottom part of the SSL stream. So basically, when this lands nicely and cleanly, we would update SSL stream to basically sit on top of this and basically create the stream API in similar fashion. Like we have a socket which does the primitives, and we have network stream which provides some convenient API on top of the socket. So I think that's long vision for this thing. And again, we hope to land it in 11 to get some interesting performance gains. Does it make sense so far? So there are basically two classes, if it does, that we are introducing. So it'd be TLS context, and it's basically something you would do once per, let's say, a server or client and whatnot. It's a concept we currently don't have in SSL stream. So for example, if you give a certificate, well, we need to build a chain, and that costs you something. So the TLS context would basically wrap your configuration and one-time options. In case of Linux, for example, this also might contain internally a TLS resume cache. So your TLS resume would work within context or within this context. So we basically have a create method for client and a server. So it basically creates something which is meant to be used over and over and over again, and whatever lifting we need to do regularly would hopefully happen once in this, and then we would basically pass it around to spin specific TLS sessions, which would basically do the handshake on individual connections. One thing to point out here is that the create for server option, it's nullable, and that's basically on purpose, that we have cases where we don't know the options until you tell, under client tells us what server it wants to talk to. And at that point, you might choose different certificates, you might choose different options. One day, maybe we post-quantum crypto, whatnot. So we don't really have the configuration up front. We basically expect the user to provide it when the client hello arrives. And SSL Stream already has a delegate, which basically takes some information and provides the options. So I wasn't sure what's the best way how to do that. So that's something for the API to possibly chime in, that instead of creating, and it's in the Ultralight design, instead of creating empty TLS context, we might have a static, a property just for this purpose, because it's basically empty container. We also might create TLS session, which the create would be nullable on a TLS session. I don't know what's the best way how to deal with it. So there'd be something up to discussion. What would be the best way how to basically drag it? But the purpose is on the server, we need to defer he actually got until we get some data. So basically, when we get over this sort of context stuff, or I don't know if you want to pause here, Jeremy, or if I should just keep talking through the proposal.
So probably take a high-level look through the whole thing before we focus on anything specific.
Yeah, so the TLS session basically represents a particle TLS instance, right? So and there are some properties to get, set, whatnot. That's not interesting, but and again, mostly mimics what the SSL stream provides. So that one of the goal was completeness. So again, at some point we can shove this at the bottom of the SSL stream. So there are two basic interfaces here. So you can operate on buffers. So instead of stream, we take read-only span, and you can feed it data, turn a crank on the state machine on TLS, and it might say, hey, handshake done, or it might say, hey, I need more data. And it also might want to send some data out. So basically, you give it data in, and you might get some data out, and basically you keep cranking it. And same for the encrypt decrypt, that basically you can give it plain text and it would produce a TLS frame with your data in it, or vice versa. So that's mostly it. And then the second interface, which doesn't exist in SSL Stream really at the moment, is that you can create it with a socket and basically cut all the layers of us doing the buffering and buffer management. And in case of OpenSSL, the OpenSSL can basically read data straight from a socket and decrypt it, and basically we can skip the cost of managing the managed buffers, as well as it opens path for kernel TLS. So on Linux, there's a mechanism where you can do handshake in user mode, but then the data, the decrypt, encrypt happens inside of kernel space. So again, that socket interface, it's both convenience, it's performance, and possibly some functionality. So that's mostly it. And again, if we want to, maybe we can jump down to some examples how the API would be used. So the iDuplex pipe is something that Kestrel would probably care about. That's their primary internal interface. So you create once a context, do whatever you want to, and then basically you create session. And until handshake is complete, you basically read data from it, you shove it to the machine, and the process handshake would give you status code. And the code could be, hey, I'm done, I need more data, I might need certificate validation. So unlike SSL Stream, this was purposely left outside of the state machine. So if, for example, the certificate validation needs to build chain, fix some stuff, I didn't really want to do it inside of the low-level stuff. So it's externalized. It says, hey, I got certificate. What do you want me to do about it? And so the caller would need to create a chain. Also, I'm proposing to add helper method. So there's a static, or there's a pre-built validation method, which would basically do whatever the SSL Stream currently does. So for anyone who doesn't care, there'd be easy way out. But it also opens option for people to do any other validation than we currently do in SSL Stream. And that's mostly it. And then, when it completes, then you have handshake done. So that's an example how you would handshake inside of Kestrel with a peer or anywhere else. It's basically, as I said, a non-blocking state machine. So you feed the data, you turn a crank, you get some result back, and you deal with the outcome. There's maybe more examples down below. So I think it's the different case. So basically, we don't have context up front. We crack the data, and it's at some point it's like I need really to tell you the options. So we surface the client hello context, and you basically can inspect it. You can choose what options you wish for that particular client, and you set the options or you set the context and say, hey, use this. And again, that's basically the different stuff that we don't know up front. And I think that's mostly the interesting parts. Any questions so far? So that, I don't know if we go back and basically look at the specific APIs. So
So I can say from chat has already been asking why you've gone with create methods over just constructors.
No particular reason.
I'll also say there's an alternative one that's suggesting separate them into create client and create server.
I think we'll have to because of the nullable thing, right? Otherwise it's weird.
Yeah, otherwise you have to pass the cast null.
So I would leave it to the API experts that I think to me they are kind of same or similar, but if we choose constructors with client and server designation, that's fine.
Right. Well, I mean the general reason for having the create pattern is that that constructors wouldn't like that your creates are different in a way, and you want to be able to convey it. So for the crypto spaces, it's the things of, well, which file format do you think these bytes are in, because they would all be a constructor that just took bytes, and it's so now we want to name which byte format you have. Here you could say create client and create server. That would let you pass null for the server options without casting it. If the types do convey the thing, so the constructor would work, except for the fact that you would like the null literal to work. So.
Yeah, as I said, I don't have strong preference, and either one is fine. So
and this isn't a big deal. I assume like part of the reason we have the context is because there's some work that's going on in like context.create that we'd rather not repeat.
Yes.
With the isServer thing, is it part of the public API? It kind of just seems odd that's the only thing called out, and you can't even get it off the TLS session.
We can take it out. We track it internally, or we use it in few places, but again, we don't need public API. You can argue that if you create it, you should know what it is. I don't know, it'd be valuable to expose the underlying options, but again, we mangle them, so we don't even keep the objects as you pass us. We do defensive copy, which is same what SSL Stream does. So
yeah, I don't think it's like super important, but it's just like where draw the line. Like, why not have isServer on TLS session too if it's like convenient? But yeah.
This piece, again, I would say, as we feel, I don't think it's important, so we can take it out to keep it minimal. I don't think we need it for anything interesting, or again, as I said, the people should know if there are server or client, right? That I would
Mhm.
hope that there's no confusion. So I don't think we actually now, when I'm thinking about it, I don't think we have a server on the SSL stream. So I think we perfectly fine to remove it and make it internal or private if you need for the internal processing.
Yeah, another thing that's like interesting is like if the context were to keep just the overloads as opposed to create server and create client, you would then ask why not a constructor? But I think because there is a create server and create client, I think because we want that, then the factory makes sense. I'm not sure if it makes sense for a TLS session.
I think for me, it was mostly consistency. And again, I don't think I care too much. So it create my throw, right? So I don't know how we feel about throwing in constructor, but that's probably fine.
That's an interesting thing. Yeah. Do we have any like general rules against throwing in constructor? I mean, obviously we would for like argument exceptions and stuff.
Yeah, so that would be primarily it, right? We don't really do much. I think the create under the cover for the context, it does some processing in the native code, especially on Linux. So if that fails, but again, I think it'd be kind of failure, right? So if let's say you force it to some, I don't know, a TLS version of which the underlying engine doesn't support, it might fail and say, hey, but again, we can surface it as a invalid argument exception or something. So and again, on this one, I would leave it to you guys, like whatever you feel it makes more sense.
I would note that drawing from constructors isn't that unusual in the fact that argument validation happens at the top of most constructors.
No.
But I would also say that if this is throwing outside of argument validation, that we need to be careful about it because you can end up with a partially constructed object that can then still potentially be seen via a finalizer, and that can lead to all kinds of weird states and issues. Because the allocation is separate from the initialization, which the constructor does. So you just want to be very careful about ensuring you don't produce partial state in the fields that the object has when you do that throw.
Makes sense. We generally use same handles for all the underlying native stuff. I think it'd be the layer to be worried about the most. So
Yeah, I think we also have a general hand wave statement that constructors should be fast. So
I don't think there's anything particularly expensive. I think building the chain might be one of them. So if you give us a certificate, we try to construct it, and that might need to fetch fragments.
yeah, the mostly the expectation as a constructor validates arguments and assigns fields, and so
You know,
so I saying that you've got to create just to say this isn't a zero cost operation.
yeah, we might do work, and again, the work might fail, or I think SSL stream now, even if we don't construct the full chain, we just keep moving on. So we might not set the intermediate certificates, for example, but we might do IO, for example, right, under the cover. So this might take some time if need to, and we might search like certificate stores and other things. So I think the native parts are cheap as far as I know. We don't really do much crypto under it. We just create some structures, and that should be fast.
So for your deferred SNI flow, where you're saying you can pass in null options, are there really no options that are being assumed in that flow? Like, is this happening before the server protocol versions would matter?
Yes, so we basically receive the hello from a client, we look at it, we extract currently the SNI and the supported TLS protocol versions, and we give it to the user and say, tell us how you want to proceed. And so we don't really touch the crypto layer until the caller gives us the TLS context or the options to proceed on.
Okay, so
So
this
this
is
is really just fake dummy placeholder. So again, as I said earlier, we can create TLS context with a null. We can rename it. We can make the TLS session nullable, or we can create static placeholder TLS context. We would say, hey, hold on, I'm gonna ask you eventually for something real. And again, I don't know which option is the best.
fair.
I think we did chat with Radek, and I think he leaned slightly towards the first alternative. So make the TLS session, make the TLS session possible to create it with a nullable context. But I think that would save confusion on the context side and basically push this thing to the TLS session. Or, if you lean towards constructors, we can have two constructors for TLS session, right? So we can have a constructor which doesn't have any parameters, which substitutes the null, and we would have TLS session constructor which takes the context, and basically we would get out of this whole nullability business, right? So we would, if you create session which you didn't specify the TLS context, it basically asks you later when basically we need it really right now. So there'll be an option we can also follow. So have either third create or 3 different flavors of constructor for a TLS session. That's actually might be the best. Or make the context optional. I don't know if you can do that, but
Well,
any
like
preference here?
if a session, let's say with no context, can basically only be used for the client hello,
Yes.
and then you can only move past the client hello after you've attached a context,
Yes.
then that does feel like a dedicated create method, create for initial handshake or
Yeah.
something. I mean,
Yeah.
the handshake's actually not done yet because
Yeah.
the client has stuck their hand out. The server hasn't grabbed it
Yeah.
yet. But
Some variation of create server, yeah. Because
Yeah.
you're talking about create client, create server, right? So it could just be like,
yeah, sort of create listener, right? Of I know that may be a bad thing for networking, but the idea being, I'm willing to listen for a client to approach before I make any decisions.
Yeah. And just
then
looking at the
That would be a good
TLS
reason
operation
for creates.
status, the need server options which should be need server context. I think I changed the mind in the middle and didn't update the option, the status code.
this is interesting. Like, so why I see the philosophical argument for the third create method, I think it is hard to name, and null does kind of make sense as just a parameter create server. Like you're just basically, delaying. You're basically just delaying the whole thing. The other thing you can consider is having create server never take a parameter and then forcing the caller to call set server context, like whether they're doing the SNI flow or not. You could even do it prior to the client hello if you wanted to, right? I assume, but anyway, yeah, I don't know what we would name the third method. That's my main problem with the third method.
And so the only create client versus create server name that I'd taken so far was on context. That sounded like you were suggesting that create client and create server would be names on session.
I know, I was suggesting just keeping them on context and then just imply. I mean, that flows through to when you pass that.
But you couldn't have create server.
And then return a null context. Yeah.
Yeah, you couldn't have create server never take options because then you would never be able to build a populated server context to pass to set context.
Right. Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah, so something like of, and then I don't know if
You'd
that
want
would need a
to
socket
be able to
handle
take the
overload.
socket.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine. At least optionally.
But some other named create group of I don't take a context, I take a pre-context, aka null, and then that's the state that ends up with you must give me a context later.
Yeah, that would work for me. I would not call it a listener, but
Sure.
Right.
I'm just
seems like the server client terminology we use in SSL stream, and I would also maybe put deferred or some way to indicate this is just a, I don't know what would be the right word.
well because
I like
placeholder
deferred.
or stop.
Oh,
yeah.
sorry.
sure. I mean we can say deferred, but you can use it right away. You just can't make it past the client hello.
Yeah.
And so I mean another option. It may make this thing hard to use. Another option would be that TLS session never takes a context. And then if your client, you just instantiate one and then call set context before you call handshake.
That's what I was saying earlier, right? Like just we'd have the constructor that takes the safe socket handle or not, and then just force you to call set context as soon as you can. We could even call it like set context. We could it doesn't have to be each server only. We could set the client context and then go.
Yeah, that would work. That would work. I'd be happy with the shape. So basically, there's a method which says set context, and you can just rename it to be agnostic.
Yeah, it's like a little weird to have like a method you have to call before you do anything 90% of the time, but I don't think it's that bad, and like it makes sense for the SNI case.
I like that proposal generally. I think it would flow nicely.
All right, so at this constructor time, is it going to do any work, or is it just going to put itself in a ready to go state?
It will get ready, so that should be cheap, and I don't think there's much we do at this point until we get some data. So again, we might allocate some native parts, but again, that should be cheap. It's really just initialization.
Right. Yeah, I mean anything that's equivalent to newing up a field is but it's would you with the socket handle do I don't know.
No, we
calculate
expect
Fibonacci
it's
numbers
all
or
ready to
something,
go,
so.
so that's again, we might validate it's, I don't know, valid, for example, right? So if you give us closed handle or whatnot, but we will not really do anything at this point in a constructor. So we just
you're not going to call read on the socket or anything like that.
Nope. I think it's a good option. So what do we do with the TLS context? Do we want to also turn it into constructor, or we want to keep it as create? And again, we would not need the nullable option, right, on a server. So I like that idea. So I like the sort of how it's shaping up.
Yeah, I mean so I assume that TLS context is like OpenSSL's SSL CTX.
Yep, essentially.
And I feel like there are a lot of options that get set, but I guess you know, like the protocol versions and etc. But I feel like that is just constructory stuff. I don't know.
I think the chain build will be the most expensive and tricky one. I think so. If we go as just certificate, they'll try to construct the whole chain so we can set the intermediates on a bar.
Oh, because the SSL server and client authentication options have both the context one and the cert one.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think keeping them as the create server and create client is better than just constructors and overloading it with the type system.
Okay, so we would remove the is server that's not needed. We would remove the nullability, and we would keep the
Yeah. Well, so
context as it
you
is.
mentioned getting rid of it because SSL Stream doesn't expose it, but SSL Stream does expose it.
Yeah.
I mean, we can less is more. Removing something until there's a need for it is fine, but
Yeah.
I would just
I would
wonder why
remove
it's
it.
not on session. Yeah, so just remove it.
So I think it's fine to remove it. And again, SSL Stream does a lot of legacy things. So again, we can always have internal one that SSL Stream can access it and surface it. But I don't think we need as a public surface on at this layer. Keep it simple.
Yeah, and you can always add it later. I was actually willing to come around on just making these all constructors, but I don't dislike create server, create client, so I definitely wouldn't hold up on that. I
Yeah,
think it's
I
good
just-
that way too.
my gut says there's going to be some future that we end up wanting like create client with default options, and it's like fine, then it's create client paren. Like moving on.
Yeah, it's like different enough. I could see there being like different overloads for each scenario. So I think that's kind of what you're saying. So yeah, maybe.
So if you editing Jeremy the proposal, again, please update also the TLS operation status. So the last needs server options should be needs TLS, context.
Yep.
And we then end up with so actually this is the proposal, right? So we end up with just doing constructors for a session, and we agree that you would set the context as soon as you feel you are ready, right? So it might be when we ask you to, or you might do it proactively before you do handshake.
Yep,
But that's
so,
easy and cheap. So
so then that just becomes set context, set TLS context. Currently it's called set server context, which is
yeah, so I would just remove the server, right? We will do
Yeah.
the same stuff for a client. And I didn't see what you're editing, or if you're editing, but I assume you do.
yeah, my edits are only in
Yeah,
VS
yeah.
Code till the end of the
Yeah.
topic.
I just, it wasn't visible, so
Yep.
Thanks.
Okay, so client, you call context create client. You instantiate a session either on your socket handle or default, and then you call set context, and then you can move on with
Yep.
things. So if you pass the socket handle, you're not supposed to use any of these methods.
Correct.
You're
And
supposed to use these, and if you
Yeah.
don't pass the socket handle, then you use these and not these.
So the shutdown and decrypt pending output and request client certificate are common. So it's
fair enough.
And I just look in process handshake versus the handshake. I think I would call him, I don't know, would it make sense to call him the same?
I'm just trying to think through should these be separate types.
Types
Don't
you
do
mean the
it.
session or
Like at most, like I could see a method that like returned like an IO type that was then specialized, but there's so much that's shared
No, yeah.
aside
So
from the IO methods.
no, it
Oh,
would
I
be
see.
that 90% of this would live on TLS session, and then
Right.
TLS IO session would have
I see.
these three methods, and TLS socket session would have
Two
these three
derived
things.
types.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Infantry has a
maybe.
question maybe or comment.
Look at
Yeah, sorry. I wanted to say that I was also playing with it, and like originally, I also tried to split it up between the types. But I think since it's very like it's hard to name it non-OS specifically. So, for example, the one that is socket bound will not, at least I'm not aware of the option to make it work on Windows, because you cannot attach to like file descriptor OpenSSL kind of style. So that is not very like general purpose machine. So I personally like the way that it can be designed in like two different types, where the abstract type holds all the state and like suspension points, and we have two modes where one has API for passing the input and the output in every of the operation, like handshake and crypt decrypt, or if we call it like read write or handshake, and the other one just relies on the file descriptor mode, but like depending on the platform specific stuff, I think this works a little bit better. So there are pros and cons in both approaches.
Wait, so
I
I'm sorry.
sent the so last thing I sent the link to the chat where I had the first proposal, and I mentioned this type of like distinguishments if you want to take a look at.
So you call it TLS detached session and TLS socket bound session. And so like capability wise, there's no difference, right? And having two derived types, it's mostly just like usability, like what you prefer.
well, the problem is if you've so there's the socket property sitting right above Sans IO. If you're layering this somewhere, you now need to just ask, is socket set? If so, call right, and if not, then do something else. And so I mean, that may just mean that it never makes sense to pass one of these into a function. But the fact that it has that three of the functions stop working depending on which constructor you called feels like that is the derived type.
Yeah, I honestly don't see much of the downside to the derived type. Sorry, Dima, like other than the naming, which might be annoying, like it doesn't prevent you from doing anything, does it?
Yeah, I mean, how can TLS socket bound session, as I called it, let's assume this is the name it we take, like how it will work on Windows? That's the question.
It throws.
You would do it behind the cover. So the plan is to make it support it on all platforms, and we might not gain perf benefits, but I think
see. I mean, if we are, yes.
The surface should work everywhere, right? Even on mobile and whatnot. So we'll just make it work.
I see. Yeah, I mean, I personally like the abstract type plus the two modes easier, because I think that improves the API discovery. So like you just create the one that you want, and then you have the specific API service that you can use, and that defends you from the thing where you call handshake, but then for some reason you call not correct overload of like read or encrypt, and then boom, it just blows up for you.
Yeah. No, I mean, as much as I like Vim, an API design modal is generally bad, and I'm coming around to the derived type too. I don't know if we call it, like TLS socket session, TLS buffer session. Could we do that?
I don't have a strong opinion naming. I'm just proposing what I came up with when trying it out first.
Yeah, detached session instead of buffer session might be better. I don't know. I don't have a strong preference.
What's detached mean? No.
Right. That's why I went with buffer.
You know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it only means anything relative to socket. It's like, well, it's not attached to a socket. But yeah.
Yeah, I think buffer makes a lot of sense because the primitive that OpenSSL uses for bio is basically buffers, so it makes sense for me.
We can use handle and buffer to make the distinction, right? So I don't really care. So again, I would leave it to you guys to choose. I think from implementation perspective, it's all the same. So whether we have one type or two types. Another thing though is like you can create, for example, file, right, which is read only, and if you try to write to it, it would also fail. So I think we also have precedents for cases where some functions might not.
Yeah, I
function
don't think
depending on how you
anybody
create
thinks
stuff.
Stream is a well-designed API.
So
And like modal can make sense in some scenarios, but like as a general rule, if you don't need it.
So here, if we would keep it, and I'm not saying we need to, would be, for example, a process engine and handshake should be just same name and same for read and write and decrypt and encrypt. I could see that, for example, you have two overrides for each of them, and but also I could see that, for example, if you are really smart, right? Maybe you read part from socket and maybe you read part from buffers. What we could do on those methods, we just, whatever you give us, we feed the underlying engine and see what happens, right? And it doesn't need to fail per se. But again, I don't necessarily see usefulness of it at the moment, but I also don't feel we need to necessarily need to make it exclusive.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think having the verbs be the same across the two, but just their signatures are different
Yeah,
would make sense. It's so then you get to talk about the concept of reading.
yeah,
So decrypt becomes read. You just need to give it the thing that came from the underlying read
yeah.
and where you would like to read it to, and encrypt becomes write.
So I'm fine with the shape. So
Yeah, I mean, more members would need to move. I just I didn't want to be
Yeah,
doing too
yeah,
much
right.
destructive editing while we're talking about the. So is everybody happy with pursuing this approach?
I'm fine.
Yes.
Okay.
So,
All right. So um so do we like handshake, read, and write for the verbs? Do we like process,
Yeah.
handshake, read, and write for the verbs?
yeah, I like the handshake read and write the best. So okay.
All right. Input and output should clearly be source and destination. Unless you think that for some reason input and output are a much more.
No,
Yeah.
I don't think I don't have a strong preference.
Yeah, I mean, like we could name it, handshake from wire and handshake to wire, but
Keep
don't-
it simple.
I don't think that'll really buy anything. And then read and write. Again, I sort of feel like should just be source and destination.
Fine with me as well. I like the fact if it's same. as the handshake. It's basically the same thing, right? It's just different operation, but
Yeah, because with write, you're not actually getting ciphertext, right? You're getting a TLS frame, which has
Yeah.
ciphertext, or you might be
Yeah.
getting multiple TLS frames. So it source it, or the read only span is what you would like to send, but the stuff that gets written to is only related. So
Yeah.
it's not pure plaintext ciphertext. So source and destination just feel like the
Yeah.
best.
yeah,
Like-
works for me.
It's low level. You need to know what you're talking about.
Yep.
Okay. Anybody have other words for these methods? Is consumed and written the canonical order? Or those backwards? Consumed and written. Okay. All right. The socket handle property comes up here and loses its nullability, I assume.
Yep. Perfect.
Right. So I think TLS socket session we're all happy with. Does anybody have a better answer for buffer session?
Looks good to me.
Okay. All right. So TLS session is now abstract, has a private protected constructor. And then what does has pending output mean?
So basically, when you, for example, crank, it's in the example. So when you give it a data, it just tells you that there are data to be written out. I guess you could check the, you can check the length of the output, I suppose.
Notably, I just did a search for it. I don't think it is in the samples.
Yeah, it's not. This is really me wondering: does this only apply to buffers? Because sockets presumably would have just written any pending output.
Or do we need it at all if we can just use the out param?
Or is it related to you're still handshaking? Or like,
Oh, one question, and I don't have an answer for it, is let's say we try to write a socket, the socket is full and the write fails, or it's partial write. We would need to somehow know that you need to do it again.
I think I get it. Yeah, if it aligned exactly with the output buffer that you gave it, you wouldn't know if it was like done perhaps until you got a zero length write, which would be wasteful when you could just check the has
If
pending
the buffer
output.
is small also, right, you might have more data beyond what you just wrote out. So
Exactly. Every time you fill the buffer, without this, you would have to assume there's more, and maybe sometimes there isn't. So I guess that would be why.
so is this saying with the socket session you call write with a gigabyte buffer, it's going to return want write?
I don't think so. I think we don't need it for socket session, right, Thomas?
I don't know how we would handle the cases when I get a socket buffer, it's too small. Because it would write
Because
something.
it's async.
It would either need to, we said it's non-blocking, right? So
Right. Never mind.
we need to surface the information that you need to kick it again when the buffer drains. And that's why you have the EPOR or KQ knowing that the socket is drained and you can either read or write to it.
But with write, like if bytes written is ever the full buffer size, you know you've written everything.
Well, for the socket it would be tricky, right? The buffers, yes, you can keep cranking as long as you getting output from a state machine.
Because I see with the buffer one, if your output buffer just happens to be the same size as what I see. So because like in the case of the socket bound system, right, the bytes written isn't like the bytes on the wire. That's like bytes from the buffer. So you know how much to advance for the next write, I would assume. It's like the plain text bytes.
Yeah, I think the bytes written, it comes from how much we consume from the input buffer.
So the only way you would have pending output for socket is if bytes written was less than the length of the buffer. If it's the full buffer, you know there's no pending output, right?
Well, again, if you give it gigabyte, right, and the socket buffer is small, the
But then
write to the undrawing socket is gonna fail.
Well, but
right,
then,
but then bytes written will be less.
Yeah, bytes written says 23.
Otherwise, how does
if we
it
would
work?
know that, right? Because it's the data after transformation, so I don't think we would know. So basically, with a clear text buffer, I think OpenSSL would just chug it, create a bunch of TLS frames, and try to write them to var, and would fail at some point. But I don't think we would know how much was actually consumed.
That sounds like you shouldn't ship this API then.
So for this property, let me do test. I'll write a test and let's solve it offline.
Sure, I'll put a note, has pending output, might need to move to the buffer type.
Yep. So we'll need to shut down also on, I think on the second mode. So that's basically sending TLS close alert. So it would be shut down without any parameters.
You need that. So shutdown, or this shutdown moves to buffer and shutdown parameterless moves to socket.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think the same for the request client certificate. So that's basically post handshake authentication on TLS 1.3 and renegotiation on TLS 1.2 and prior. That's where the server can ask for a client certificate later. So we need the same functionality on both. I think it's missing for a socket.
Okay, and then the drain pending output is only for
Buffers,
buffer.
yeah.
Okay. Client hello info makes sense on both, and we don't distinguish client and server sessions. So
the only one weird. Sorry, go ahead, Jeremy.
I was gonna say, so now we're to, you have a method returning a read-only span. So what is the lifetime of this read-only span? How can someone know that they must stop reading it, etc.?
So that's actually the one I was planning to talk to. I think conceptually this belongs to SSL client hello info, but for 11, I didn't want to make changes beyond this new API. So in SSL Stream, the client SSL client hello info only lives throughout the callback. And we talk about lifespan here. What I would like to do is basically make it throw after the handshake is done. So basically we would define lifespan for that object, and basically we would preserve it to the handshake and throw invalid operation exception afterwards if you try to access it too late. Dimitri?
Yeah, regarding this exact span. So in case we are talking about the last session, how we called it, like socket session. So we have a file descriptor under the hood, and we are on Linux calling OpenSL. The callback that OpenSL provides returns not the raw bytes of the TLS client hello message, but some kind of wrapper structure that provides a representative state of the TLS client hello. So should we then like rely on SSL client hello info then instead of this?
So the current implementation does use the callback because it has caveats, and also we need to get the whole client in order to parse the SNI. So we basically create duplicate of the hello, and we keep it as long as we want to. So it's basically sitting in native memory, and that's why I choose the span, because it's cheap, and my goal would be to get rid of it as soon as possible. And as I said, if you access it later,
but the problem
will-
isn't when you call the get client hello bytes method. It's you call the get client hello bytes method, you save it to a local, you now do other things, and now you read from that span. Is that an AV? Or segfault,
yes,
depending on your
yeah.
platform, right? At which point I kind of really don't like it.
Yeah.
Um,
What would be the option?
so I mean, one option is you come up with a containment, so it's use something about the client hello, pass a T state in, pass a callback, and we'll give you the client hello bytes, and you can't return them outside the callback. So you can limit the amount of time that somebody can work with it. The other option is you admit that it has to live long and copy it into managed memory.
So if it lives in the struct in the client info, we would still have the same problem, right? That basically somebody can grab reference to it and use it. It's actually, I think it's fine if we do something at this moment, because one thing, I want to make it cheap for cases when you don't use it. So if we say we construct byte array, and I think it'd be fine, because then you pay it the cost when you call the API. I don't know it'd be any better way how to do that. Do we have any buffer-ish type that we can invalidate, and basically when somebody says access it, we will just fail?
I don't know of one.
I don't know either. So this is basically for a case that there is some specification that you can fingerprint various layers of the stack, from TCP to SSL or TLS to HTTP, whatnot. So this is basically a mechanism how to provide the raw data, so the timestamp could be calculated. The alternative would be that I think currently the fingerprint, the J4, it's the only one use case. So we could bite the bullet and basically calculate a checksum for the caller, right? So rather than providing the raw data, we would provide method to calculate a checksum. I didn't really like it originally because if it changes or whatnot, or if there are more flavors of it, we would need to keep updating it. And two, for example, right now, there is no way how one can, for example, decide on a client cipher suite or whatnot. So if we surface the buffer and somebody wants to decide on parts other than we provide, they can help themselves, right? So that was the motivation.
Yeah, so Kevin just shared an interesting idea in chat, which is different than my something client hello. So I don't know if the SSL client hello info, I assume that already exists and isn't disposable. But if
No,
you're
it's a struct and it's not disposable.
okay, because if you had a class, it might also work with a struct. But if you had a class, you could return the thing to somebody, and if they dispose it before you move on, then you never needed to copy the native into managed. But
No.
if they then call the I would like to move on to the next phase now, and the object isn't disposed yet, then now you copy it to local and
Yeah. Or we can dispose it, and if they try to access it later, they would get object dispose exception, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's true. Well,
anyway, you would at least define the cycle, right?
The problem is if you ever give them a read-only span or a read-only memory to the data, you don't know if they're still holding the reference of that span or memory beyond when you've invalidated it. So you need a path. You either need to make it safe, or if Tanner's still with us, then maybe with our unsafe evolution, we were willing to say public unsafe read-only span of byte, get client hello bytes. You're playing with pointers, be smart. I don't know if that's a thing that we want to do with unsafe. But
in particular, we want to use it to represent memory unsafety. So for spans, if we are returning a span that wraps a pointer and its lifetime is inherently not correct, i.e. you could, for example, dispose the session out from under you, which frees the pointer, now the span is dead. Then since span is a safe wrapper, you want to have that thing that materializes the span and returns it to the user to be unsafe. So it sounds like that might be okay here, but I wasn't fully following what is creating it here and why. What's responsible for the lifetime of the memory it wraps.
So we could make it persist through the whole session. I just don't like to drag memory around, especially on a server when you might have thousands of parallel connections, right? So I would really, really like to make the lifespan shorter than the session, and document what it is and make it safe. So, as I said, I didn't want to touch the infrastructure, but if he can move it there and if he can make it disposable, that would work for me certainly, or us. That basically responsible citizen would dispose it and get rid of the cost, which I would assume Kestrel would. And if you don't, then everything works. You just drag extra bytes, which you don't need to, unnecessarily.
Yeah, the problem is you can't invalidate it if you give someone the span.
You'd have to have something like try get client hello bytes, which takes a writable span, writes the bytes to the span, returns how many it wrote, and then just always says false if it's already been freed and can't copy it.
That would actually work for me as well. So basically, we could do that, try get info and have semantic that would tell you whether you gave us big enough buffer. And basically throw if we don't have the client hello anymore, right? I think that'd be quite viable. It would still be cheap. You would still pay some cost. We could do something that if you call it, it allocates the array under the cover. But I feel it'd be better to rent it and basically just calculate the checksum.
I guess it only need more space, and yeah, we don't have a good how many bytes do you need pattern. It is maybe one thing Win32 did better than us.
Should we add it here or?
I mean, like we could do something weird like that, and whether we do it on operation status or a try. Try, return false. Needed tells you what the answer was.
The pattern that the HTTPC CPI exposes is public bool, where try for it was able to fetch it, or false if there was not enough data, get client hello bytes, then destination, and then if the result is false, then bytes written is the value that you need. You don't need another bytes needed.
That violates framework design guidelines.
Yeah, I mean,
no, I'm like
that's how.
The particular API can be doing that, but our rule is bytes written should be 0 if try returns false.
I see. I'm just sharing how it is done in other framework.
Yeah. Instead of bytes needed, if this is an operation status API, so if this is an operation status API, I would expect that it works for all of the operation status enums that can be returned. And so I would expect this also to take a starting index. That way you can iterate properly. That is with UTF-16, you're basically able to say here's the source and the destination, and so you can slice that based off the number read and the number written. So with this one, if we're returning operation status, I would expect it to be of a shape of span destination int starting byte index effectively, then out int byte written, and then we should either have an out int bytes remaining or a separate bool try get number of a try API that returns the number of bytes that are available in the client hello byte size.
I think that we could make work. So would basically either say needs to write or would return success, right? If it's fully written, and as long as you call it exactly once, right? So then we can keep internally the offset, and when you call it again, we would give you the next chunk.
Right, and so I'd either expect it to be the client hello length with a bool returning, with it being non-iterative, or it being iterative like this operation status. And whether it needs to be iterative probably depends on how big we expect that length to be.
I think the client hello will be typically 4 to 16K, but I don't know if the post quantum crypto makes any differences. I think it's mostly just cipher list. That's the biggest, and bunch of extensions. So it's kilobytes. I think the length would be nice because then you can just rent it, right? So getting the length would be cheap. Renting or creating a span also be cheap, and the operation also be cheap. So I like to be cheap.
So big enough that a user might want to actually stream it, and so we would need this to be operation status and to return a and to also take a start reading from this position
Well,
because I've already read that much.
I mean, the other thing is expose the length and then
Do the try,
and
get
then just the
final.
normal try, and it's like
Yeah.
try
I
with your
like
buffer.
this.
If it returns false, then ask the
You
length,
didn't
rent,
get-
and
yeah.
deal with it yourself.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Is it should either be these two, so a get length and a single normal try pattern, because the only failure is the buffer wasn't big enough, or we have the one API that returns operation status and also takes the starting read index and has a second out parameter of bytes remaining.
Uh,
And then out int bytes remaining. Because you want to know how many were written to the span and how many are still remaining in the buffer. So I would think one of those
enough.
two would work and fully cover it, depending on if we want iteration support or no iteration support.
and then chat has also offered. Admit it's a pointer.
I personally like the combination of two, the first two, because it's again simple. And I think mostly you already have the cost. So
Yeah, I mean if you're doing this for as blazing of perf as you can get, that means that if somebody needs to call this one, they do have to take the hit of a, let's call it
Copy.
16 kilobyte copy. That is
Yep.
pretty cheap, but that is not read from a pointer cheap.
yeah, one question is, what would we do if we move this to the client info struct?
I mean, it still has the same
Problem, right?
like either you have to copy it so that the read is always safe, or the span is always projected into managed memory, and the GC knows when it can reclaim it, or I mean, you can be super weird and you can give the struct a safe memory handle.
I was just
No,
thinking about
you
it,
can't,
that,
because
you know,
once somebody gets the pointer out of it, you don't know that they're still talking about it. Yeah, so either you take the hit and always make the copy, or you come up with a disposable pattern to give the pointer, but then make a safe copy. But if they already got the span, they got the dangerous. So yeah, I don't think there's a way without doing something like this. And no, the only way that this is safe is because TRET is not allowing ref struct. Otherwise, they could just return the span. And yeah, I think that this is probably the cleanest answer. And if you need something else, we can iterate later.
Yeah, that seems reasonable to me.
I would agree. And if you need to revisit 412 and make it part of the SSL client hello info, then we can talk about it then and basically clean it up or update it in a fashion that we are happy with. And again, I sense that we might need to touch the structure for post-quantum crypto as well, or other reasons. So we'll need to do some more work and more preparation. So this looks great to me.
Okay.
Anything else?
Kevin had asked in chat about the lifetime of certificate objects. For example, right now there's if you have a certificate and you call SSL something certificate context, so did that make a clone, or is it still holding a reference to your cert? What happens if you dispose your cert? So then that all gets carried down into here of what's the lifetime who's responsible for the lifetime of the input objects? Does it need to outlive these objects? What happens if you dispose it in the middle? Those things might just come up in the security review, but they were
Yeah.
questions asked during
Yeah.
the meeting.
I would expect to be same as SSL stream. So I think for stuff we hand out, we keep track if you access them or not, and if you do, then you are responsible for disposing them. For the inputs, the SSL certificate context is not disposable. I guess the certificate itself is. So I think we expect that you manage the life cycle. And
So-
again, I think that'd be
That they need to outlive
same
the
as SSL stream. So I can go look.
right, but the idea is that they would need to outlive the session, and
Well, not necessarily, right? So in a practice, the underlying crypto doesn't need the certificate object, especially not to manage one after the handshake. So when we start, we create server handle for the X509 certificate under the cover, and that lives as long as the session lives. Whether you dispose the certificate or not, we don't really care. But I can look into it and make some documentation notes. And I think it might be helpful for SSL stream as well. And also, I think I can write tests to demonstrate that what I said is actually true. So
always a good start. All right, so okay, so for manual validation, so you have the default validation here.
that's really just a helper method. So
But if somebody is doing manual validation, because I guess does accept with default validation mean it's going to invoke a callback? Can the callbacks be set on the options? I think
that's it. Yeah, I
these
think it
types already
probably
have the
should.
callbacks.
I think it should, but I don't think it does at the moment. But I can fix that.
Right.
Yeah.
But so if somebody wants to write a thing without using the existing callback, they would get remote certificates. You're going to tell them what's on the wire.
Yes.
Then they're responsible for doing whatever they want to do with that data.
Yep.
And then they have to call set remote certificate validation result before moving on.
Yes.
And is that a mode here? Need certificate validation? Yep.
Yep.
So this would be you pump the handshake, then you're the client, so now you get to the point of certificate validation, or you're the server and you asked for the server or the client thing. And then you called write, and it's going to yell at you if you didn't do certificate validation yet.
Yep. Yeah, essentially.
Okay. What's want credentials?
That's the one where you start as a client and server asks you for a client certificate, but you didn't specify one up front. So this is the mode where you ask by your peer to provide a certificate. We call it credentials because that's the Windows terminology. Maybe we should say certificate. But
yeah, I was good. So how does the client specify it?
And then you say set client certificate context.
Yeah, since nothing in this API talks about credential, I would rename want credential to want certificate.
Yep, fair enough. It makes sense to me. As I said, it kind of comes from the Windows terminology, but we are not Windows, so.
Is want the right word there?
Yeah, because
You mean
Like
for the
you
region,
would
right?
prefer needs.
Well,
Yeah.
needs or requests or
because the server can be in the. So IIS introduced, I think, this terminology of the server can optionally accept a certificate, but what it means on the protocol level is they say, give me a certificate, and the client says no.
Yeah.
So how does the client say no?
Why don't we make the set client certificate context nullable? So if you want to move on without providing a certificate, then basically you set it, but you don't provide it, or you call this method, but you don't provide it, and we can deal with it at the pod layer. And the one read, one write comes from the OpenSSL terminology, but again, I see that it's inconsistent here, so I think the needs would be more consistent.
Yeah. Well, I mean, needs makes it sound like you're not going to accept null, so I wonder if certificate requested is.
Yeah.
Uh,
True.
Yeah, I personally like certificate requested if it is that, if it's a request that can be denied. And I wonder if the same applies to want read and want write, if those should be read requested or read permission requested. Want X just sounds
Yeah.
not quite right.
It's not
If it
professional.
is SSL terminology, like for read and write in particular, it's like kind of okay. But yeah, like because I guess needs is technically inaccurate in some cases.
I'd say you are English people, right? So pick the right verb, and I think we'd be fine. And
what does. I guess when you're returning want read, what is supposed to happen?
so in case of the buffer mode, you would need to acquire more data and feed it in and crack the handshake again. In case of the socket mode, that basically means we try to read from a socket, the socket didn't have data, we expect it like full TLS frame. So it's your responsibility to figure out when the socket is readable again and call the handshake again. So it's basically pausing point saying we can't proceed on the TLS operation until you supply more data, or even if you call read, let's say there is only partial TLS frame in a buffer and we can't process, it just says, I need more data and please make sure the data are available and call us again.
Right. So this is you call. Well, because if you called handshake, and you're supposed to just call handshake again, I don't know that want read or want write either makes sense. Unless saying handshake want read is you haven't finished giving me the handshake, please give me more data. And want write
I
is.
think that is it, right?
Okay.
Like, I mean, yeah, it would
Can we-
tell you whether you need
will
more
the
like
operation
input buffer
status
or output buffer.
Answer, or will operation status tell us what we should call these?
Well, the want read might be needs data, right? The want write,
Well, I'm
I
pretty
can
sure we
go
have an
up.
operation status enum member, which is I
Need
can't
more
move
data.
forward because yeah, so need more data.
And destination too small is the other side of that.
Yeah, that
But
one's
like
weird because
it implies that
it's telling you I need you to call me again. But like I can see the handshake saying need more data of your source. You have not. I've consumed all of your source, but you haven't finished the handshake element yet. So give me more source would be need more data. And then, hey, I filled your buffer. but you need to give me more does make sense on destination too small for handshake. So I guess the question is, would destination too small always fill want right? Like if you call right and don't give it enough destination to hold the whole TLS frame, presumably that should give back destination too small.
That might be fine.
Of like I can't, like, bytes written to 0 because your destination was not big enough to hold anything, dude. So so can we replace want read and want write with destination too small and needs more data?
I'm fine with that. I don't think it matters. I think it's mostly just naming, right? So what would be more sort of intuitive way how to deal with it? But again, I expect both provide examples and eventually be consumed by the experts. So hopefully they know what it means and
Yeah.
So
But using the same terminology we use elsewhere in the platform
yeah.
feels goodness.
Yeah, and destination is small, even on a socket, right? You might argue that the socket buffer is too small, so it's still a buffer at the end. So I think that's fine. So are we good? And there's the one item for me to look at the needs to pending data, how it works, and I'll go explore it, and we can sort it offline, I think.
Yep. So I assume like acceptable issuers, channel binding, and channel binding are both verbs from SSL stream.
Yep, that's basically to power the upper layers.
Yep.
Seems like the clients don't send the acceptable issuers anymore. I think the last last OS which did it was Windows 7. But again, we have public SSL surface, so I wanted to make the complete. So again, we can shove it under the SSL stream.
And APNS is part of client hello.
Sorry,
APNS.
ALPN.
Sorry, yep, ALPN.
Yeah.
It starts with an A. It's 4 letters. Okay. From things I know about the protocol and the shape that you presented, this seems fine to me. Does anybody have any other items, or should we slap approved on this and move on? Though I assume you heard from Levi that he wants a security review.
I did not, but we can certainly get it done if we need to. I'll talk to him, and again, it's not necessarily new code; it's just new surface, but we can still do whatever needs to be done.
Yep, and I guess just making sure while we're here, do you need anything to be virtual based on us splitting the types? I assume no, but just because you can hide it because it's all closed hierarchy, but.
Well, it's just mostly cater to Kestrel. So if Kestrel is happy, I'm happy. And if we need to revisit something, let's do it in 12 as experimental. Gives us some leeway. I don't necessarily want to neglect something or say, hey, I don't care, but seems fine so far. So
all right. Hearing no further dissent.
Thank you, gentlemen. Or I guess it's mostly gentlemen. I don't know. I don't know who's in the chat, but thanks to everyone who participated.
Thank you. Do we still do CLS compliance? I saw that attribute. I didn't want to.
We still have to annotate where the compiler tells us we have to annotate, but it's not at all accurate across the entire ecosystem, and things that should conceptually be CLS non-compliant that we never marked. Like span itself is conceptually not CLS compliant, but it doesn't require the annotation.
All right.
So we drag it because the application protocol is itself, it's marked as such. So we carry that flag forward. But
thanks for explaining. No objections here.
So chat brought up a late question. Let's see if we care. In operation status, so not TLS operation status, done is 0. And here we have complete is 0. And then destination too small and need more data are flipped from what we have here. Do we care? Or are we happy with what's on screen?
If we have that ordering already, I feel like it is a non-issue to swap it to be consistent, and
Yeah,
it
let's
may
be-
unlock some useful things for
Yeah.
users.
Yeah, why not?
But
Now
it
that you've
may-
already edited the comment.
Yep. Okay. It was. Does anybody think I should hit edit? And I heard so let's yeah. And do we need to slap experimental on enum? Sure, why not?
Yeah, let's keep it. Yeah.
And this is of course under the assumption that 5007 is still the next available number.
It was, and I'll do it. I'll check when
Yep.
we have the final sort of PR ready.
And consider renaming complete to done to match operation status, though I don't think it matters. All right, moving on.
Okay.
Thank you, Tomas.
Thanks.
All right, hybrid cache, setting expiration based on value in cache entry factory, 121530. We already approved this, but it's coming back for some edits. Are you with us, Peter? Yep, I see you.
Yes. So to quickly summarize, this proposal is the approved proposal is about adding an overload of get or create overloads of get or create async, where you can change options or edit them inside the factory delegate. If you scroll a bit lower. And so we have this get or create async method. You have hybrid cache entry options parameter which is existing, and you have this factory. And what we wanted to do and what we did is adding a new parameter to the factory, so that you can change these options inside the factory when it runs based on the results of whatever you run inside. The approved version of the proposal has hybrid cache entry options here as the parameter for the factory. So the user can pass the hybrid cache entry options to the method, and then a different instance probably of hybrid cache entry options is passed to the factory, and the user can modify them. We think that it's unfortunate that these two are the same type, because we don't think that we will and we don't think we will want to always keep them synchronized, or always keep them have the same methods, the same members. And right now they are exactly the same. So right now it makes sense to have them be the same, but we think there is pretty good chance that we will regret this decision, and so we want to separate them and have hybrid cache entry options and hybrid cache entry context as two separate types, as it is what you see here.
Where's the context type?
It's
up
at
here.
the top. Yeah. So this is the original proposal. The current proposal is a bit different. It's at the complete bottom. Yes, so I'm proposing adding this hybrid cache entry context. And this div is compared with what was approved. So the approved API basically changed the hybrid cache entry options from init only to writable. I'm suggesting that we revert that and add the hybrid cache entry context.
Fair enough. So from previous version, this diff block doesn't exist.
Yes.
It would just be here. Okay.
And then you can expand the section that does all the overload changes, but it's just changing options to context.
So when someone calls get or create async and you need to call the factory, you'll start by creating a context from the options, pass that to the factory, but then they can change it in the callback, and then you'll respect it when they come back.
Yes, and the behavior is exactly the same whether we call the type hybrid cache entry options or hybrid cache entry context.
But I'm just asking,
Yes,
are you
but
are
yes.
you setting all the values for them,
Yes.
or are you passing in a thing that's another option would be you pass in all nulls and they only set the things they care about? It's
so we are passing the values there. So basically, you can see what the currently set expiration is, and you can change it if you want.
okay. All right. So really, the biggest question seems to be: does anybody have feelings about the name hybrid cache entry context as this? What would you like me to write it as read write type?
Yeah, there is some idea that in the future we might provide some information that basically read-only information in the context, but we don't have anything concrete right now. And in that case, the context name would make more sense.
I mean, you do have the revision, which is something. You are giving them state from somewhere that's not on the options. So
I'm willing to grunt and say that hybrid cache entry context sounds sensible to me.
Yeah, it sounds reasonable overall.
okay.
And so like the main motivation for this, I was like trying to read the long comment too, was that basically it might diverge from options, and there are a few things like tags, which we're not approving right now, that we might want to add to this context later.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, it has
All right.
already deviated from options because it already has the
Revision.
get only revision.
Yeah, fair enough.
So, and I guess from last time, because I don't remember, why are almost all of the options on here nullable? I would think that most of these have a reasonable default value other than null that could indicate not set. That's not usable.
I basically I think it make having null if you set it to null, then you're basically saying use some default, and I think that that makes it clearer.
Yeah, I've gone back and forth on this over the years. Like for things that have default values, is it better to be nullable so you know that it's like staying default, or is it better just to have like the default as the initial value? And like there is some value sometimes, especially with these like filters, um, to basically know whether or not the default's been changed. Because sometimes they want to like apply their own defaults only if it hasn't been explicitly configured. So
And
I
yeah,
don't know. Nullable kind of makes sense.
and setting it to null is different from doing nothing. Because
Okay.
the previous value that's already there from the hybrid cache entry options, there might be some value, and if you set it to null, then you're basically resetting it to some global default.
Right, and you could expose the global default to be a some like static or constant, but it's like easier. Honestly, it's just easier to leave it nullable. Like you usually don't need to read these things, and they're more to like other than to know whether or not they've been configured. What the actual value is often less important to these filters than whether or not it's been like manually set.
Yeah, it's just more the consideration of like some of these have existing semantics, like time span being 0 typically means unset, and not necessarily no expiration, for example, or immediately expires. Whereas there is timeout.infinite time span for you, where you want to have never expiring. And so,
Well, yeah, in the case of nullable, I'd expect 0 to be and expire immediately. But like, yeah, infinite is obviously still makes sense with nullable. And then
we don't have a lot of places where we intentionally need to represent both the default value and differentiate it from the non-default. And so across the entire BCL, we don't really use nullable in many places. There's just a handful.
we use it a lot for options that have defaults in ASP.NET Core. Not saying this is that, but I think it makes sense here. The initial options are nullable as well. This is the context. Obviously, we could. They don't have to be. We could put in what the global defaults are, but I think nullable probably makes sense.
Yeah, it's nothing big. It was more just caught my eye as this isn't normally what we expose. So
at the top of the proposal, you had the context type as having a options constructor and also having the current options on it.
Yeah, that's outdated.
Okay. And so the only public constructor is the default constructor. Or are there no public constructors, and you meant to have that as a private constructor?
I think that there shouldn't be a public constructor.
So you're the only one allowed to make these.
Yes.
Okay.
Also, Tanner, like back to the original point a little bit, but like in ASP.NET Core, and specifically where you can have like multiple configuration comments for options, it does sometimes help to know whether like a value is default because it's the default, or someone actually really wants that specific value that happens to be the default. When you're like coordinating between different things, it doesn't come up a lot. But,
right, and
yeah.
and it sometimes matters if you actually need to be able to represent both states, and you don't have a sentinel value.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So sounds like the only changes we're saying that it has no public constructors on the context type, which was the intent but wasn't what was presented. So
Okay, thank you.
yeah, does anybody have other feedback? At least it sounded to me like we were leaving the nullables nullable. So
Yeah, I think we are. I think we're good.
it's like if I was too busy writing notes to listen correctly, then I'm happy to be corrected. But all right. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
All right. We're at 10 minutes. Can we? This seems like maybe 10 minutes.
Yeah, most of them are fairly straightforward. So the read-only as bytes is unsafe because it can expose padding bytes and therefore uninitialized data. And then as bytes, the one that returns a span is unsafe because it allows you to potentially write those padding bytes as well as write what are called unsafe fields and therefore violate the invariance of another type. So for example, span itself has the invariant that its length field must never be negative, and that can only occur via unsafe code, such a span API, assuming that you could represent a span of byte to a ref struct, to the field of a ref struct would allow you to violate that never negative invariant. And then similar again with as memory, although that one in particular allows you to get a mutable view of immutable memory. And so it's required that you not actually write that data.
Sorry, Tanner, can you, like, maybe I'm being obtuse, but the first one you already talked about, so you're changing a read-only span of T to read-only span of byte.
Yes.
And you said that's unsafe because you can mutate it,
No, because
or you can read it?
Because you can read uninitialized memory.
Oh,
Padding bytes are not guaranteed to be zeroed because they
Got
do
it.
not have fields associated with them. And so while in many cases it will get zeroed, it's not strictly required. You can therefore read that data and it could potentially leak the previous contents of that memory location.
I
Also
now understand
expose-
what you mean by padding bytes.
It would also
Yeah, I
expose
get it.
private fields, which I feel like you previously said supposed to get unsafe.
All right, thanks.
As memory returns the mutable view. As ref returns a T over the from the bytes, and therefore it may be misaligned. As ref does a similar thing for the mutable one. Cast.
So on that one, is it that the method will fail, or that it will give you a T that can read torn?
It's that you have a T that reading it could cause a hardware fault because it is not naturally aligned. So if you just allocate 4 bytes, for example, the allocation alignment guarantee is that it is 1 byte aligned. If you then try to read an int from it, there are platforms that will throw because it requires that all 4 byte reads be 4 byte aligned.
And we would rather make asref be declared unsafe than throw for a misaligned input.
We can't guarantee the alignment because it could be arbitrarily moved by the GC between the point that you call as ref and getting the ref T and then dereference the ref T.
Because yeah, I mean, I don't know that compaction ever actually changes alignment, but
Yeah, it's .NET itself has stricter guarantees in that it guarantees that all array allocations are 8-byte aligned, but other runtimes may not. But beyond that, the span itself could be allocate an array and then slice off the first byte, and so it will always be misaligned. You cannot align such data.
Okay.
Um,
But
and while
getting a ref
while
byte out of it would still. So if you have a span of T, you can get the ref. This is only the going from byte to a T.
right.
Yeah. Okay.
And in particular, most modern platforms like ARM64 and Xarc, they guarantee that unaligned reads work unless you go into a special mode. And most operating systems will handle unaligned reads via catching the fault, doing the fix up, and returning the data anyways, and it's just very slow. But there are platforms like Linux ARM32 where that doesn't happen for, say, float. And you will actually get an access violation or data misaligned exception. So can't rely on implementation details in the contract we expose to users. If you have that, then use unsafe.read unaligned.
Fair enough.
Cast allows arbitrarily reinterpreting between T from and T2, which can cause misalignment, exposing of padding bytes. And then the mutable one has the same consideration, but you can also then violate the invariance of the type by mutating the fields, bypassing their checks. Create from pinned array, as the comment says, it does not actually pin. It assumes that the T array is already pinned and marks the is pinned field in the memory of T. It's the user's responsibility to ensure that it was actually pinned, such as using GC handle or GC allocate array pinned.
You act like anybody has ever called memory.pin.
Create read-only span takes in the ref T and the length. So the user must ensure that there are at least length readable elements from the reference. Same thing with create span. Get array data reference. This one does a null check, but it does not handle length 0, and it returns a reference to the length 0 storage, which is valid and keeps the array alive, but you are not legally allowed to dereference it. Dereferencing it is undefined behavior. And so that's what makes get array data reference unsafe. Similar with get reference for read-only span and span below it. Those return a reference to the first element. In this case, it will remove the read-onlyness if that was there for read-only span, but it will return a reference to the storage that represents a 0 length span. And keep that span alive, just it's not legal to dereference the data, and so the user has to ensure that they do not actually dereference the memory if they use that API. Read works just like the ref return, like the as ref above, but it implicitly dereferences. And so it has the same consideration of can be doing a misaligned read, can potentially expose padding data from the byte, writing the padding bytes, or otherwise bypassing the invariance of the T, because it skips the constructor, and therefore all of the safety checks that ensure that the field is only within a limited set of states. Try get array removes the read-only protection, returns a writable array segment. And then same with the next view of try get memory manager. Try read is just like read, it's just a try API, but it can expose the padding bytes and skip the invariance by constructing the T directly from memory. And same with try write is it can expose padding bytes or otherwise inaccessible fields and data. And then there's the two APIs just below it that are explicitly safe because they don't violate any memory safety invariants. So you can always get an IEnumerable from a read-only memory, and it will ensure that the read-only memory is referenced and functionally kept alive while the enumeration exists. Throwing if it happens to effectively be mutated like any other enumerable, and try get string returns the string if it actually wraps a string and otherwise fails and says there's no string here.
And I don't know how we're gonna mark that, but turning a string into a char star through fixed presumably needs to stay unsafe because you now get back a writable char star to what we call an immutable string.
I don't remember what the language said about whether fixed is unsafe or not. Technically, so theoretically that operation itself is safe, and the unsafety occurs at the point you dereference, whether reading or writing.
Oh, and I guess
and
we say
so-
writing through a pointer is always unsafe.
Right, because
Yeah.
you have no guarantee that the memory is accessible. It's on the user to ensure that. So functionally, you cannot mutate without going through unsafe already.
Fair enough. All right, and yeah, the read and write makes sense because otherwise, the read and write need to be unsafe if the as is unsafe, and vice versa, because they're functionally the same.
Yeah.
It would be nice, but I don't know how to do it. I guess we add a new thing that adds a runtime check. It would be nice if we didn't have to call it unsafe on types that had no padding and no private fields, I guess.
Right,
Yeah,
like numeric types, for instance, or just like certain structs, and yeah.
Yeah.
We've discussed that a little bit, and whether there should be some kind of API that works for the concept of all bit values are legal effectively. We've not come up with a good answer for that, but we really need the concrete use cases put in front of us for us to, I think, design that API and decide where it's exposed.
That's why I was confused at the beginning with as bytes. I'm like, oh, as bytes on like a float or whatever is defined. Like
Yeah.
there's no padding there.
Yeah,
But then it's like, of course, actual objects. But
Read only
yeah,
span event as bytes 100% makes sense.
yeah.
We could theoretically do it via like extension APIs. We could do it via exposing more APIs on bit converter, which is where like single to int32 bits is today. You could imagine us having the span APIs for like get bits for an array of this primitive type. There's a few ways we could do it, but I think we'd want to see the concrete use case before we built an API proposal to bring.
That's fair. I mean, really, it's a little bit of see anywhere that anyone's using as bytes because they probably didn't intend it to be unsafe. Yeah, so like I think GUID is a well-packed type, and it looks like GUID 2-byte array clones itself by using memory marshal as bytes.
Yeah.
And
so there's going to be a few cases like that where as we go and annotate, we'll end up making those APIs inner unsafe only,
right.
so they stop the propagation of unsafety. and we'll use that to build basically a
Requirements list.
table of what APIs would be useful to allow us to elide and remove unsafe or centralize the unsafety to this one spot.
Yeah, I do think there's going to be some things where people do that themselves with their own helper methods. They'll be like, well, this usage is clearly safe. I'll do an unsafe block in a helper and call it done. But it'd be nice if people didn't have to write many of those.
Yep.
Yeah, chat asks, should we take the hit and make get reference just throw for empty instead of declaring the thing unsafe?
I was wondering that too.
No.
And give up perf? Yeah, no, that's what goes against the purpose of these APIs.
That API is explicitly designed and used because it works with empty. It would be a horrible breaking change. You can just do ref span open bracket 0 close bracket, and that will get you a ref to the first element, the same as get reference does, with the same null check, but also with the length check. So you already have a way to do that and do it safely without the unsafe API.
Fair enough. All right. Any other comments on this batch? Boop. Alrighty. And I guess we will pick up color unsafe next time, unless blocking issues insert themselves out of it again. So, all right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. I guess people on the chat didn't get my estimate of. I sent in the meeting agenda that I assumed we were going to spend an hour on the first issue. We spent an hour and a half, so I was off by 50%. Oh well. It's mostly because I kept talking. But yeah, we had good discussion on that one. I think I personally am happy with the shape after than the shape before, and we all got there together. So I'll see you next week at our same .NET time on our same .NET channel. Until then, Auf Wiedersehen.